Hi, it's Joy Foster, founder of Tech Pixies, and you are listening to the Sparkle and Thrive podcast. And of course, if you're wanting to join us live, you're more than welcome to, usually on Fridays at 10 a.m. And today we are joined by an incredible guest, someone I've known for several years now. Maybe, Jimmy, maybe you can tell the story of how we met, I think, or maybe I can elaborate on that. But we are starting our Playing Big series. We're kicking off a whole series on playing big. I read the book by Tara Moore. I loved the book. Unfortunately, she can't be a guest with us, but what I've done is I've found some very inspirational guests who've played big in life and who've also worked with women who've played big in life. So Jimmy, welcome to the show.
Yeah, well, no, it's great to be here, Joy. And although it feels a very COVID relationship, despite the fact we've known each other for a long time, we've still not met in person yet. But it's great to kind of be doing this. So Joy and I first met when I was working for the Prime Minister, Theresa May, the 2017 general election campaign. And I was told that we were about to do a big kind of reskilling announcement as part of one of our manifesto pledges. Could I find a inspirational company for the Prime Minister to go and visit at about 3 days' notice? And this is always quite a then bizarre process that you sort of go through as you try and research different startups that are happening out there. Because that was my role for the Prime Minister, was to be the business special advisor, always kind of focused on entrepreneurship. And so I had to sort of research all these companies that were doing this, and I came across Tech Pixies, and I was blown away by what you guys were doing. So this was during the 2017 general election campaign, and I just thought this is the one. And then you have to go through this slightly strange process of trying to speak to the individual or the company without giving away too much, because there's lots of things that are changing, and you may end up doing a different announcement or a different speech or something like that. So you don't want to raise people's hopes too much. But yeah, effectively, I called you and said, look, I work for the Prime Minister and she'd quite like to come and visit you. So how does that sound? So I don't know what your reaction was, Joy, when that happened.
Well, I think the funny part about that is I don't think you were allowed to say Prime Minister. I think you said a senior female minister. I think that's the way that you said it, which of course there was only one female senior minister that I figured was calling from Downing Street. But what was really interesting is, like, I could have totally missed that call, and the crazy thing is somehow I didn't miss that call. What I think is hilarious is then there's this procedure where they have to come in and they have to do the sniff dogs and they have to check everything out. And so I'm at Legoland on the weekend, like in the middle of queues, like messaging you back and forth as to like where she can come and when we can do all this whole thing, what time everyone can be there. And also I've got to coordinate about 15 people to actually be there. It was such a process. But I have to say it was such a first of all, a blessing for us when Theresa May came, regardless of what people's political opinions are. Whenever you get the opportunity to sit down with someone who is making the major decisions or is influencing the major decisions, and some of those decisions are about the community that you serve, you take that opportunity. And I just felt like it was important to have that opportunity. What I was so impressed with by her were two things. One, she came and she had a private kind of, and it wasn't so private, but like a private audience with me where we had a conversation about what we were doing, surrounded by aides and people that were kind of making sure that we were having the right kind of conversation and capturing the conversation. But then, so she listened. She really listened to what the problem that the women we had in our program were facing. And she really just let me talk and go through it. But the other thing that she did that was I just watched her in awe. She was in the middle of the election. And of course, the entire press suite was there too. Everyone in the press was there. And because she was on the campaign trail. So they were drilling her. And when I mean drilling her, like they were rude, like the questions they were asking were so harsh. And I remember thinking a normal person would like totally lose their, cool under those circumstances. And she didn't. She just answered the questions. She stayed calm and cool. And I thought, I have never seen that in my life. That was so impressive. So that was really, really cool. Now, Jimmy, I want to correct you on one point. We have met in person. You invited me to Downing Street and we had a private meeting in the same room. I think that there was a big negotiation done in the world stage.
That's true. That was the G7 table, wasn't it? From the last G7 in Northern Ireland, because we just had the last one. I forget. It's funny. It's one of the reflections that actually you get in Downing Street. I was caught up with one of my former colleagues this week, and you say, because you're working so long and so hard, your memories don't form properly. Yeah, we've all had troubles with the pandemic and so on, and time sort of going incredibly quickly and then not at all. So yes, you are right. That is my mistake. I remember that clearly now.
It's special for the person coming, right? Because you're in Downing Street every day, but when you get invited to go to Downing Street and you get to go through that whole process, it's so unique and different for us. We remember every minute of it. Like I remember walking up the hallway. I remember sitting at the table. So that's probably, you're used to it, or were used to it.
You're right, but it's a real thing that you have to try and remember when you're there, because it does become very blasé, and it does become, it does become the norm for you. And I remember somebody at the end of my first week saying, whereabouts are you in the office or something? And I remember thinking at that point, God, it's so strange calling this place an office, when we've already calling it that. And so, yeah, I would often try, particularly at these sort of great moments of history, of which there were a number when I was there, is just remind yourself of what it was like the first time you walked up the street, because, I was as giddy as anyone about it. And, it has funny effects on people going there as well, and particularly when meeting the Prime Minister. Yeah, even the most accomplished of business leaders, meeting a Prime Minister does funny things to them.
Yeah, no, it's so true. Well, what I do think is amazing about her, whether or not she actually remembers us, we did send her a mug that said Tech Pixies on it, and then actually said Prime Minister on it. A couple years later, after she came to visit us, I met her at another event. And I said, I just want to thank you for what you did for us. You really put us on the national stage. And it was really interesting because prior to her visit, the website was all about Oxford. Like, we train in Oxford, right? That was where we do our program. And knowing she was coming, and knowing she was on the global, or the global stage, but certainly on the national stage for the election, I thought, we've got to adjust the website so that we are national. Like, we're in London too, right? Let us know where you are and we'll come to you. And it was really interesting because I went onto the website the night before. I changed everything up to say, yeah, just let us know where you are in the country, and then we'll let you know when we open up a program there. And I kid you not, like the next day, because she name dropped us on national television, our entire website just spiked, and we had more people register in one day than we'd had in that whole previous year. And the gift that she gave with her influence was that we have women who saw her on television, went onto our website, registered, did our program, and are now financially independent and like living their best life as a result of that. And I think that was the point of this conversation, was that I had heard a really brilliant podcast between Brene Brown and Melinda Gates, and they were talking about the 4 spheres of influence where we need more women in the leadership. And that is in politics, for sure, and finances and tech. And there was a 4th one, and I'm blanking on it right now. But I really want to hone in on this politics side, because one of the biggest things we see at Tech Pixies, so we help women who are would classify themselves as, tech dinosaurs or social media imposters. We help them to realize that if they don't find their voice, if they don't take off their invisibility cloak, if they don't become visible, they will not have an impact in this world. And if one of their goals is to have an impact in this world, which a lot of women have that goal and that desire, but they don't act on it, then they've got to become visible. And becoming visible comes with a lot of worries about trolls and negativity and, not being good enough, and what are people going to say, or what are people going to think. And I think women in politics are so rare because of all of these fears. So you've had experience with the second female prime minister in the history of the UK. And you've also had experience with other top female senior leaders and top female business leaders. What are some of the traits that they have that separate them from the others? And how do they overcome this fear of negativity, fear, this conscious bias issue that they have, this imposter syndrome issue that they have?
Well, I think it's a challenge on a number of ways. I mean, there is a great Margaret Thatcher quote about the challenge in Westminster is that you have to be twice as good as a man to get anywhere. The good news is that that's not hard, and that always kind of sticks with me as quite a very Margaret Thatcher style quote. I think it becomes more of a challenge. I mean, and also, Joy, we've spoken recently as well, but I left number 10 because I was up stayed on with the new Prime Minister for the transition period because I'd worked with him when he was Mayor of London, and I left because I was having our first baby, and I was just like, I can't continue at this pace anyway after 3 years. And afterwards, the baby arrived, and the pandemic happened in March 2020, and my wife ended up returning to the NHS because she's a doctor to fight the pandemic, and I became a stay-at-home dad. So I'd gone from kind of prime ministerial briefings to Peppa Pig, which is not quite what I'd been anticipating, or from Downing Street to diapers, whatever kind of phrase you want to use. And it's been a big change, and I must also come back to using technology, because I know that's a lot of where Tech Pixie started out in terms of retraining people specifically in social media and technology. So must return to that. But I think the traits are, when Theresa May became Prime Minister, there was a lot of focus on it because we thought that Hillary Clinton was about to become the first US female president as well. And I remember a lot of some Congress people coming around and asking questions about what it was like to work for a female prime minister, and it was quite hard really to answer it. And I remember her being asked it a number of times as well, and sort of responding with, I've never done the job as a man, so I can't give you an answer. There are so many demands on women, and the scrutiny is often a lot higher of it. Julia Gillard talks about this, the former Australian Prime Minister, just in the sense of every morning, she'd have to spend quite a long time thinking about what she was going to wear and that side of things. And, a man has to go about as far as deciding which colour tie he wears. And trust me, I've worked with some, senior male politicians, and they spend a lot of time worrying about the colour of that tie. So it's, it's a good job that they didn't have an entire outfit to kind of necessarily worry about. Otherwise, we'd never get anything done, potentially, as a country. So I think it's a challenge. I think there are very different things that are held up, but it's as you said, you do need a thick skin in politics, and that is something which is seen perhaps as traditionally more of a male trait, because they just things bounce off them more, because you're right, and you saw those questions, and that was on a daily basis, and that's before you even get into now the modern world of social media and running their own accounts, which most politicians broadly do run their own accounts. It's only when you get to the kind of very senior levels do you have a team that does that for you. And there are just some horrendous things kind of written on there, and even as an advisor, you would inevitably feel stung by it on those things as well. I will share one funny story with you. One of the most intense questioning periods would always come when we were on a trade trip, and because it meant that all the journalists could come to the front of the plane and just pepper the prime minister. And because it wasn't normally we would be flying to Japan or China, and we'd have all these trade deals announced, but the press pack would always sort of be just chasing whatever political stories. And normally it's only a general election campaign, all that, where they get quite so much open access to be able to ask whatever they want. And I remember one journalist we were flying on the Monday, and Theresa had been at church the previous day, and he said there was I can't even remember what the problem was now, but there was something difficult happening with Brexit or whatever. And the journalist said, "What do you pray for at church, Prime Minister?" And she looked at him square in the eyes and just said, "I pray for sensible questions from journalists." And I just thought it was so good. And I've always remembered that. But sometimes, it was a great moment.
Well, that's one of the things that I find really interesting about the British political system versus the American political system. There is a lot more of this kind of humor, satire, and the clever responses. And it's not to say that the Americans don't do it. It's just, we don't have that same grilling of the president in the way that you have the grilling of the prime minister. And the banter, it's very interesting because when you do watch those, and I don't watch them that often, but when you do watch a clip of them, the prime minister always gives back as much as they take as well, which I find really interesting because that's something that wouldn't happen in American politics as much, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, the simple difference is because it's the head of state in the US, and obviously Queen is the head of state here in the UK. But it was amazing being at the press conferences of when the president and the prime minister would do a joint one, because of course when the president walks in, the whole US press corps stand up and clap the president in, and obviously all the Brits just sit there on their hands just thinking, no way, like, would we ever do that? And I remember the first Trump May press conference in the States after he'd won. So she was the first leader to go out in January 2017, and the PM went to Laura Kuenssberg first, who fired in, as Laura does in her very impressive way, some really hard kind of double-edged question about things. And Trump just said, like, wow, that was the first person that you wanted to ask a question. He was like, boy, there goes that special relationship. And it was these kind of worlds colliding, of where he just could not like appreciate that was the first person that we wanted to go and ask questions to. But it's an interesting thing as well, because, you know, Laura gets a heck of a lot of stick as well on Twitter and social media. And, you know, her job is always to put very difficult questions to people. And I can assure you, at no point did we think that Laura Kuenssberg was on our side, and yet people on social media and Twitter would interpret it that way. And you know, she is somebody else who is a senior, high-profile woman who you know, has taken an incredible amount of stick, and she is an uber professional and is very good at her job.
And what do you think? I mean, I guess how do, and I guess it's not just women, but it's people in politics who have to deal with this. I just think women get it worse because there's the ability to kind of do the digs on the female side that you can't do to the males. But like, in your experience, how do female senior leaders how do they combat that? How do they deal with it?
Well, I've often found with like working with senior females is that they are very rational about things, and they tend to, you know, go at things through a very logical process. And that was often what Theresa May did. And, you know, sometimes there was criticism of, you know, her not being able to be passionate and kind of putting the oomph in the communication at points, but everything was always done in a very logical and process driven way. And that is a trait which is very good for people in high pressure situations, no matter what they're dealing with. And I think it's you know, it's becoming more important to be able to have those. And, you know, I think as a country we've made good strides in it, but there's a long way to go, and we need to be doing more, and we need to be improving the pipeline. And, you know, I know there'll be lots of people listening and watching to this right now. There is a great website and campaign called Ask Her to Stand. And I have started doing it now as well. And I think I did it with you, Joy, the other day. I hope I did. When talking about politics with female friends, colleagues, or whatever, it's turning around and asking the simple question of saying, well, why don't you stand? And why don't you put yourself in there? Because it's a complicated world to work out how to do it as well. It's a very archaic system of panels and different things. I mean, it's better than it was, but it's you require a lot of inside knowledge. And Isabel Hardman's book, who is a journalist at The Spectator, has written a great book about why we get the wrong politicians. And yeah, she talks a lot about this in there. But yeah, it's worth checking out the campaign group Ask Her to Stand, because we need more people putting themselves forward for it, and not just at a national level either. You know, we can make big changes at local politics level, local council, and of course that's where Theresa May started out as a councillor in South London.
Wow, yeah, that's so great to know about that campaign and also that book. And I think that's true. Is, you know, one of the things that I've benefited from in the online space is that there's a lot of people who have gone before me, had very successful online businesses, and they share their roadmap in their courses and their programs. And, you know, I think that's half the battle, is figuring out the roadmap to getting there. And I think the first hurdle to overcome is being worthy of going for it, feeling like your voice matters, that what you stand up for is more important than the fear you have around what people might say about you. And who you are. I think for women, they need that support and that roadmap to get themselves going in the right path. Do you have any suggestions for where women can start with that, apart from the book that you recommended? And
yeah, I mean, it's one of the hardest questions in life, isn't it? It's like, how do you get self-belief, and how do you keep that going as well? And I think we've all experienced this in the pandemic, of that being really hard at points, and inevitably is all taking hits at various points. And I've had challenges during it as well, of you sort of think about it, and that imposter syndrome as well. I mean, gosh, I had that when I was at Downing Street on various occasions as well. And it's surrounding yourself with good people, right? And that's the thing, and building that network. And that's a real challenge. And it's a real challenge actually when you get a bit older as well, right? Once you've kind of gone past that initial first job phase, it can be quite hard to find yourself in a group of people at a similar age that have some kind of common bond. In fact, one of the next big things of it is probably your kind of NCT group and so on when you have that first child. And so, how you encourage self-belief is one of the big challenges. But I'd just say the campaign group again, Ask Her to Stand, run by some brilliant people, and it gives lots of advice and tips on there for how to go about it.
Yeah, that's great. And I don't want to gloss over what you said earlier on, which is so important, because you have experienced what 90% of women have experienced, and probably 10% of men, if that, have experienced this role reversal change where your spouse goes back to work and you're home doing the childcare. What's really interesting, though, and what I love about what you did, and I really want someone who might be listening to this thinking, how could I use, that little time I have? Because you have if you can carve out a little bit of time, even as a full-time parent carer, if you can carve out a little bit of time for yourself, what Eve Rodsky in her book Fair Play calls it is unicorn time. She says, like, if you can give yourself a little bit of unicorn time, a little bit of me time, what would that look like? And I want you to talk us through the process that you went through, because you ended up launching a podcast, a very successful and influential podcast as a result. And obviously that's starting to take up a lot of your time. But where did, in the midst of going from Downing Street to diapers, and then trying to figure out what you were going to do with yourself with the limited time you had, the limited unicorn time you had, what was that process like? How did you get it going? And what has that done for you?
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. So like I briefly said, I mean, I think it's poor form to sort of come on another successful podcast and kind of like plug your own too much. So I'm glad we've kind of got to 25 minutes before I've done this. So my podcast is called Jimmy's Jobs of the Future. And so I left Downing Street and we were having the baby, and I just thought this will be great time to spend with my wife and have a few months at home and kind of just exploring things and kind of stepping out after a few high octane years in Westminster, and see what kind of happens and what comes up. After all, I'd been advising on the new economy and entrepreneurship. And we actually went and studied at California. We went out to Stanford University, took the whole family out there when my daughter was a tot, and it was kind of easy to do. We had a great 2 months out there, came back, the pandemic happened, and as I said, my wife went back to work and I became a stay-at-home dad for that kind of first bit of it. And I sat there and just thought, like, what can I do? Because it wasn't a kind of traditional paternity leave. I couldn't go and see lots of people, right? It was, my wife was at work and we had our 1 hour walk around the park per day at the beginning of it. And I just thought to myself, with everything that was about to happen, that we needed to understand about jobs of the future. And there was an element of when I was in Downing Street that you would still get some of the big high street retailers, Debenhams, etc., announcing 1,000 job losses. And yet we were at record high employment. So it'd be something that I would always try and brief the Prime Minister on, was like some entrepreneurs that had created 10 or 12 jobs that wouldn't get media coverage and so on, but it was happening all the time. And I just thought with my contacts and networks, I'd be able to bring in pretty good guests from these entrepreneurial spaces who've built really impressive businesses and created lots of jobs, and we could explore those together. So it's partly a self-interest point of view of me trying to work out what I'm going to do next with my career, and also the fact that it was a podcast meant I could strategically record it in nap times as well. And so we've had some great guests on it, like Anne Bowden of Starling Bank, who's created 1,000 jobs in the last 6 years, all around the country, in Southampton and Cardiff, London, and then other great entrepreneurs like Pip Jameson, the founder of The Dots, which is like a creative no-collar network for people that want to freelance, which is amazing. Catherine Parsons from Decoded. I have a big emphasis on the podcast remaining kind of 50-50 on the kind of male-female split. And it is interesting when I get so many men that write to me saying I'd love to appear on it, and I can count on one hand the amount of times a woman's done that, actually. And it's just that nature of it. And so it's been really successful, and it's growing, and we're in Apple's top 20 business podcasts and so on, and we seem to have caught a bit of a zeitgeist for it, because I think people are interested. And I went up and saw the Gymshark guys, who will be kicking off our third series later in the summer, and they're going to be hiring for a lot of jobs, and he was going through some of them, and I just thought, I don't recognize these jobs, right? And I graduated just over a decade ago, and I look at this and think, what are all these things? It's quite interesting when you look at the demographics of who's listening to the podcast. We've actually got quite a lot of over 50s listening, and I think that's people wanting to help their kids with their careers and so on, because it's hard to work out, because in a way there's never been more options now than ever before, and that's great, but it kind of helps those that are privileged and clever already, because they are able to navigate it even quicker in some ways. And so whilst in a way the world's become a lot more democratized in terms of its information, it also kind of reinforces the privileges and the disadvantages that some find themselves in. And also, just as a genuine point, particularly interesting for you at Tech Pixies, is when I came out of Downing Street, I'd spent 3 years there, so a decent portion of time, but not loads of it. And we worked on some very arcane technology systems there due to security and so on. We weren't allowed to use things like Google Docs and all this time. And I have to say, coming out, I had not realized just how far and how quickly things have progressed in that period. And it has taken me quite a time to kind of get back up to speed with that, and I'm in my early 30s, and it's been a very useful reminder in that sense. But look, do check out the podcast, Jimmy's Jobs of the Future, to give it another quick plug. It's got lots of interesting entrepreneurs talking there about jobs of the future, and the Pip Jameson episode is particularly good, I think, in terms of the way the workforce is changing.
Well, I love your podcast, and I definitely wanted to plug it. I hope to be a guest on it. But I think the thing that I love about it is just what you said. People don't realize how many jobs in tech are not tech jobs. You still need customer support. You still need project management. I mean, these are things that women are exceptionally good at. And in a tech company, they pay extremely well as well. And you can move within the company quite quickly if you've got those skills.
Exactly. On that one, the Hayden Wood episode, which is our very first episode. So he runs Bulb, which is a renewable energy company, fastest growing company in Europe. And he has built a team of, I think, close to 1,000 people now. It was so interesting talking to him about it, is that he reckoned less than 5% of people had an energy or, strong renewable energy background before that. And you can look at that company, you can be passionate about, green jobs or passionate about the climate, but not have any particular demonstration in the you might not have a climate science PhD or even undergrads, or we don't even really have that kind of study at A levels or school. And you can think, well, I would never be able to work there. And actually, you're right. Like, he still has lots of copywriters. He still has lots of marketeers. He still has lots of what you might term a traditional job, but is obviously very much with a green element to it. But if you can demonstrate that in the interview, who's saying, that's the kind of key to it. But I do think it's that, classic male female divide as well, is that men will look at a way that they can make themselves relevant for it, and a woman will look at the 10 bullet points and think, I can't do one, therefore I can't do the whole job. And I think that's that's a real example with these companies. Again, Anne Bowden at Starling Bank, like, she talks about all these different jobs that they've created there, and you would think, oh, well, I don't have financial services, I don't have a banking background. I mean, Anne actively encourages people that doesn't have that. I mean, but it's been fascinating to talk to people about it like that.
Well, that's super interesting. I think that the one thing that I have recognized with tech companies that have these great jobs that pay well, that aren't tech based, like you said, the copywriting, the marketing, it could be the project management, could be customer service, customer support. The downside is a lot of these companies prior to the pandemic, and I think the pandemic has changed things, they would only have full-time jobs. And it's really interesting because I interviewed Matt Mullenweg, who's the founder of WordPress and Automatic, which of course powers like 36% of the web now. But he was saying that tentatively they were rolling out the ability for people to work less than full-time. And it was something that they were doing now after having thousands of employees that were full-time. They were starting to in order to recruit women, they were having to change the rules to more part-time roles. And I think that, from a policy perspective, and I don't even know if that works in the policy space, but businesses until the pandemic were very unwilling to have people work from home part-time flexibly. And suddenly we had to work from home part-time flexibly. And somehow we've kept going. And I think a lot of companies are recognizing that. I remember interviewing a guy that was high up at Twitter. He was like VP of Twitter in the UK. And he said to me that something along the lines, I said, well, will you have flexible work? And, and he said, at this point, we don't. And it was so interesting because Twitter was one of the first companies to then say, okay, everyone can work from home forever, and it's been interesting to see how the pandemic, in many ways, while it has hurt a lot of women, particularly women in lower skilled jobs, it's also probably elevated opportunities for women because of the changes that companies have had to make. So what do you think about that?
I think it's right. And I don't think anyone really knows how this is all going to shake down at the moment. And a lot of people are talking about the classic at the moment seems to be 2 days in the office, 3 days at home, etc. I'm not sure that's going to be the way that it works. I don't really have an alternative. Whenever anyone coalesces around some sort of group think, I initially begin to get skeptical because I always think that that's the danger. And I think it will be in lots of different ways that it cuts. I think that the challenge is going to be drawing boundaries, right? And it has been in the pandemic, like, really hard on that. And if you're part-time, there is always a danger that you end up getting dragged into doing more of it. In the same way, exactly the same way that when you're full-time, you do as well. Like, there aren't many jobs, if you want to be successful, where you can just where you can check out early. Like, it's hard to do that because there's always more stuff to be done in an interesting job, right? And that's the challenge with it. It's interesting, some of the startups that I've been speaking to, actually. So I spend my time advising during the podcast and so on, and those that are just starting out. And we're doing this a bit with podcast because we hope that Jimmy's Jobs of the Future is going to grow to be something bigger than just a podcast. But you may well end up seeing places being creative in terms of once a month, going for a night away at a hotel and doing 2 days either side of that, right? Quite intense creative work and so on. And actually, almost not really taking laptops.
We're doing that at Tech Pixies. I'm on board with this. So we're taking our entire team to Bath for 2 nights, it's been a palaver with like all the Airbnbs we've had to rent in order to stick with the COVID restrictions. But we've got the entire team going, and then people who can't spend the night, they're coming in for the day. We're doing the bad tour of Bath, where we're going to like see all the funny stories and the bad stories about Bath. And then we've got 2 meals planned. And we've said to the team, look, guys, this is not about doing work. It's about connecting to each other and, you know, really kind of connecting back to the core of what makes this business tick, because the people make the business tick, right? If the people who are serving the students are happy, the students will be happy. And it's really about checking in with them. And we've got single moms who have made arrangements to be there because they want that time with each other, and then just that self time. We even have free time for 5 hours in the afternoon for people who are staying overnight. Like, go do what you want to go do. If you want to go look at the Bridgerton tour, go look at the Bridgerton tour. If you want to go swim in the spa, go swim in the spa. It's really about like, let's just get away and do that. And I feel so validated in that decision right now. Thank you for that, Jimmy.
But I think that's the way, right? Because as well on childcare, like it's much easier to plan childcare doing something different once a month or once every 2 months, or how often you want to do these things, rather than have to do it like 2 or 3 times a day and so on. So I think that just sounds so much fun, right? And that's what you're trying to do. And people can do the classic desk research, or the desk operating ones. And I think that sounds so much. It just sounds really fun, like the bad tour of Bath. Like, I'll have to check that.
Right? And that's the point, is that we have happy people, right? Happy people who laugh and enjoy themselves, because we know that happy people they serve people better, right? So, and we have an amazing team that serves each other and the students that we reach out to. So, but I just love that, because I was recently talking about justifying the cost for it. And, really it was like, look, if we take care of our people, we take care of our business. And I think this is an important point. Okay, great. Well, that's cool, because you've got the insight into the future, and we're already doing it. I feel super cool right now. My husband says I'm not cool, but right now I feel very cool. So let's just wrap this up with, first of all, I want to say thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for kicking off our Playing Big series. We do have live audience on when we film it on Fridays. Not everyone who listens to it joins us live. We have quite a few more listeners who listen to it than watch it, but I want to respect those who have come. Vicky says that Jess Phillips has been very vocal about the horrendous trolling she and other strong female politicians receive, much more so than men, and has evidence that it has put other women off of following a career in politics. And we discussed that early on in the podcast. She says, how can this be addressed so that more young women are encouraged and supported to enter politics so they can become female leaders of tomorrow? And I think what she's asking is there something legally that can be done to change things, or, how can we prevent this trolling from happening?
I think it's very hard. And I think, the social media companies have to kind of step up and do more, but that's a very kind of like easy answer to kind of shift it onto them, because it's, it is human behavior, and people have, always treated politicians with a healthy dose of skepticism, which broadly is probably a good thing, frankly, and not being too deferential to them. But obviously the situations of it have gone way too far, and there is a responsibility on people to think about language, and particularly in a world where we talk so much and there is so much content that is being created, and politicians have always loved to talk. But I saw it in the Brexit debate. Obviously that was where I was focused on during my time at Number 10, and that was the big story of the day. And some of the language from both sides, from male and female, from elected leaders, was pretty poor. Using things about such language as traitors, and there's some pretty horrible things briefed about the Prime Minister at points as well at the time about how we're gonna, Tory backbenchers had said they were gonna hang her and things like this. We've all just got to be a bit more careful with that, because it has a very large impact on it. And I don't agree with Jess Phillips much politically, but she's a phenomenal campaigner. And the UK Parliament and the UK as a whole is much better off for having Jess Phillips kind of involved in it and leading on some of these domestic violence issues, and just the general kind of hate that we see.
Yeah, well, I think we do need to be careful of the language we use. I the rule I've always had with my kids when they say things that maybe they shouldn't say, as they're learning to navigate what they should and shouldn't say, is that helpful or hurtful? And, I think we have a choice as humans to speak what one author that I just recently read in a book calls words of life to people, which is this affirmation, this way of speaking to each other where we can empathize and understand where they're coming from. We may not have to agree with them, or we may not agree with them, but there's a way of speaking to someone that acknowledges what they're going through, and then can then have an answer that's empathetic to them. And it was really interesting because I think it was in this book as well, he was talking about the American political campaign, and he was talking about how different politicians answered the same question. And he said, and I think it was the campaign between Bill Clinton and it would have been George Bush, is that correct? And it was that they were asked a question, and basically George Bush responded with sort of a political answer, didn't connect emotionally to the person. And then Bill Clinton, when he responded, tapped into the emotion of the person and empathized with their situation, and then said, what he would like to see. And that difference, was quite dramatic in the way that they responded. And I think that the author mentioned something about, it's too bad his wife didn't pick up on that trick, that he was doing when she was running for president. But I think our words are powerful, and we can choose to speak words of life, or we can choose to tear someone down. And, it's how do we use positive language that's helpful to get a point across without tearing someone down in order to move the needle forward. And that is the challenge, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's the great example of Ronald Reagan against Walter Mondale, where he was asked about, whether his kind of, he was 73, I think at the time, and about whether he was too old to be president. And, Reagan comes back with, I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I'm not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience. And I've always just thought it was such a kind of wonderful line, and very Reagan-esque kind of humor. And humor plays a very important part in politics as well, actually. But yeah, it's just being a bit kinder, and just trying to pause a bit more before we say things is a challenge.
Yeah, I love that. I think one of the lessons that I've learned is that we definitely want to be focused on, if you're going to go into politics as a female, I think bringing a sense of humor is going to be important. I think that's one of the things that I've learned from you today. Bringing resilience and, tough skin, that's also going to be something else. So I just want to really, really appreciate your time today and this wonderful conversation that we've had. And I want to thank you. And I really want people who might be listening to this, for example, when we're in the middle of our boot camp, sometimes we share some of our favorite podcasts. What I want you to hear from this, if you are listening to this and you're on our boot camp or you're thinking about joining the 90-day program, I want you to hear what Jimmy did. Jimmy took time out to be with his child so that his wife could go back to work and do the work that she needed to do, which was a very important work in the NHS. And in doing that, didn't give up on who he was, found that unicorn time, found that space for him, created this podcast, which is now really taken off and has the legs for something greater. But you took that risk, you did it anyway. And one of the things we teach on our boot camp is one of the superpowers, obviously it's taking off your invisibility cloak. It's getting clear on your enhanced future vision. But then we also, we talk about the network that you should be on and social media speed and agility. And when we talk about social media speed and agility, we talk about what you should post and when you should post. And we also talk about this when we talk about market magnetism, kind of building up an audience. But one of the key things that I talk about is podcasting. And I say that the UK podcasting market is not saturated. And it's a great market to get into. And that's a great place for people to start becoming visible without even having to be on camera. You can do it with your voice. but obviously if you're willing to do live videos as well, that's really good. So I just want to also acknowledge you for doing that, for still finding your way, even despite kind of coming out and being a stay-at-home parent, especially during the pandemic when you were totally on your own as well. I cannot imagine having to do that. I have 10 and 11-year-olds, and I've said multiple times that the hardest age group, if I had to go through the pandemic, that hard age group of the toddlerhood would have been really difficult, because that's where I really leaned on other people so much.
Well, thank you, Joy. And I would just say, don't worry if you don't know where you're going. Look, I had some pretty, moments during that time where it was like quite hard. I'd gone from this very sort of like high-powered, impressive central position, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And, it took a long time for me to kind of work that out. And it's just, to your point, is like, try things. If you never do, you'll never know. And it's just try things, keep iterating, and you'll eventually come up with something. And I sometimes think, I got the podcast out a year after I'd left Number 10, and in some ways I'm infuriated it took me that long to kind of get through that, because it's should have been such an obvious thing for me to do. But you're right. I mean, there's a lot of podcasts out there at the moment, but that's because we've all been at home. But I think there is real space for it. And the part of the beauty about doing the podcast is the information you find out about it. I also find when I write my columns in the Times, particularly when I came out at Number 10, it was very, very useful to be like, right, I've got 800 words to write about this issue. What do I actually think about this issue? I can talk about it for a very long time. Right, I'm politics background, right? That's my nature. But it's actually doing those things. So writing, podcasting, experimenting, all these things are really important to try and do, because eventually it leads you there. There's a great, if people have time, there is a brilliant Stanford commencement speech from Steve Jobs, where he talks about his career and all the different things that he did, including going to like a calligraphy class, which made him really appreciate design. Completely random. I think he was able to get free food there or something from it. And it just talks about all these things and how he came up and how he ended up at Apple. And it's just amazing, because you can look at these people, and particularly in an Instagram social media world, you can look at people's lives and think they've got it nailed and they've completely cracked it and it's all been plain sailing. It never is. Like, they will have had problems and failures along the way, and that's all just part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want more of Jimmy, please go and check out his podcast. We'll obviously link to it in the show notes. It is, no joke, one of my favorites, next to Holly Tucker's Conversations of Inspiration. Those two are my go-to podcasts when I need some inspiration. And I remember listening to the one you did with Catherine Parsons, and I have personally, I know her personally, and I messaged her and I'm like, oh my gosh, I love your vision. And, it was such a great podcast. And I just got so fired up. I woke up at 3 a.m. and I had to write all these ideas down. And so, I do think it's very, very powerful. There's one little note here as well from Erlinda. She says that the Parliament Project, renamed Elect Her, is a good group that is inspiring women to find their career in politics. Many of those I met in their events have already participated in putting them forward to becoming councillors in their respective boroughs. Some have progressed to lobbying to become MPs. So that's a great group to know about as well. Well, thank you all for coming and joining us live. And of course, if you're listening on the podcast, please do share it if you felt that you liked it. And of course, leave us a review. If you go to techpixies.com/podcast, we can even send you our podcast guide once you've subscribed to our podcast. So we'd love to do that. And we can get you up and running with a podcast in just a couple of hours with the guide that we've created. Thanks again, Jimmy. I appreciate your time.
Pleasure. Thanks, Joy. Can't wait to get you on our podcast soon as well. Great to see you again.